everybody. How we doing this morning? Yeah? You guys learn anything yesterday? So can I hear you go, oh yeah? Yeah, right? It was a good day yesterday. I got a bunch of stuff. So here's the deal. We're going to jump right in and start talking about how do you scale your business, right? And I want to share with you what I've learned over the years about what it takes to get yourself up to the level where you're doing over $600,000 in a year. And for me, in my experience, I've been here for 23, almost 24 years now. I used to be kind of a college kid sitting around hoping I could pay the bills selling knives and spend a lot of time, in bed thinking about making phone calls, at the kitchen table thinking about making phone calls, on the couch thinking about making phone calls, at the team meeting thinking about making phone calls, on an appointment not thinking about making phone calls, at conferences thinking about making phone calls. Anybody know what I'm talking about? Like you've just thought about making phone calls quite a bit, right? And so, and it happens to all of us, I think, and I want to share with you guys today what I've learned about what it takes to kind of get to the different layers or sort of the different benchmarks in the business. So I'm going to share with you today like what it was that I had to go through and what I've learned about what it took to get to $100,000 in sales every year. And then what it took to get to $200,000 in sales every year, and then 300 and 400 and 500 and beyond. So just so I know who's in the room today, how many of you have had a $100,000 year so far? Awesome, great. How many of you have had $200,000 year so far? And how many of you have sold over 300 or more in 1 year so far? So Q out there with the watch, love it. We got you here with the watch, that's awesome, I love it. Jeff Majors back there, Ben Cooper, sweet. We got some champions in the room today, but I'm very excited for all of you. How many of you in this room, when you think about it, you're like, okay, I would really love to actually be able to sell $200 or $300 or $400,000 in a year and clear a six-figure profit for the year? Raise your hand if that would be exciting for you. Sweet. So hopefully I can help you crack that code today. First thing I want to share with you is what's called the one thing concept. Okay. So I want you to write this question down. And by the way, I'm going to put a lot of information on the slides today, so feel free to just take pictures of them instead of trying to write it all down, because I'm going to move pretty quickly because I've got some stuff to get through with you today. But this is a guiding question or a guiding principle for me. And it's, every year if you're answering this question and you're pursuing the answer to this question, you'll be amazed at what you can get accomplished over the course of 5 or 10 or 20 years. What is the one thing this year that by doing will make everything else easier or unnecessary? It's from the book called The One Thing. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend you get it. It's written by Gary Keller and Jay Papasan. Gary Keller is the guy who built Keller Williams into the #1 real estate company in the world over the course of just 10 years. And so they took over RE/MAX and Century 21 and multiple companies. So this is one of those things where if you're asking this question on a regular basis of yourself, this is part of your annual planning strategy, which we're going to talk about here in a little bit. It can make a really big difference and really help you focus in and make sure you're staying on track towards your goals. So there's 6 steps to scaling your business to over $600,000 a year in sales, right? So number 1, for me at least, this was my process, kind of the steps that I had to go through. For all of you, all of these steps are going to be important. Where and when they show up for you and when you have to overcome them is really kind of up to you based on your unique situation. And so you may go through all the 6 of these steps in a different order, but just know that you're going to have to figure these things out for yourself if you want to perform at those highest levels. So number 1 is conquering complacency, right? Number 2 is crafting consistency. 3 would be linking layers together, like linking layers in your business. I'll explain that in more depth here in a little bit. Scaling skill sets would be number 4, and making sure your skills are at the highest level. Number 5, building systems of support within your business. And then number 6, loving leverage. So one of the biggest questions I get asked is, how do you get so much done? I basically have 4 full-time jobs. I sell almost anywhere from $800 to $1 million in sales every year, myself personally. I also run, basically a full-time mentoring and coaching business. I help with Vast Action, and then I'm a national consultant with the company as well. And I've got some other things too that I do to help generate income. So that's basically 4 full-time jobs. And one of the things that's really great, the reason I'm able to get it done is because of the last 2 things, 5 and 6, right? But the only way you can get to the level where you've earned the privilege to be able to build systems to support and make those investments in your business, and then also love leverage and leveraging through people, through team, is if you do those first 4 things. So let's dive right in and talk about this. So, the path to 100K for me, right, was all about conquering complacency. What do I mean by that? Well, for me, it usually shows up, and it still does today. But complacency is that whole idea of like, I know I should be making phone calls, but there's this other thing that came up, like the TV, that I feel like doing instead because I don't feel like making calls. I should be doing something, but I don't feel like it, so I'm going to do something else. Anybody ever had this feeling? Anybody guilty of falling prey to this? Yeah, for me, it happened as well. So it's usually, for me, it shows up as making calls versus watching TV. I love movies, I love good shows. Now, man, with streaming services, like back in the day when I was selling 100 grand, I mean, it was cable TV and, 20 channels. Nowadays, it's like 85,000 channels, plus you have 18 different, streaming platforms or 80 different streaming platforms, whatever, depending on how much you want to pay for them. And it's just crazy because, it's really hard. So, everyone is different. For some people, it's the bar, being at the bar versus on appointments, or it's social media. It's being on social media while you're at the booth. So, are you at the booth or are you on social media? Like, what are we doing today, right? What do you feel like doing? But we have to identify whatever it is that most often causes us to not do that which we know we need to do consistently to progress toward our number one goal. So I want to ask you, what's your number one goal this year? Write it down right now. Just put it down there. Nobody's going to ask you to share. Don't worry, this is private for you. What's your number one goal this year? Is it a sales goal? Is it an income goal? Is it a savings goal? Is it a client acquisition number goal? Right? What is it for you? Write that down. And then I want you to think about what's the number one distraction that you have? The number one distraction. What's the thing that holds you back the most? Like, it's the thing that kind of consumes your time. I've done this exercise with many people over the years that I mentor, and one of the things that comes up often is, in today's world especially, it's social media. And, it's like, hey, how much time do you spend on Instagram and Snapcrack and, Face Chat and U-Book and anyways, those things, right? So don't get me wrong. I get on Facebook. I get on YouTube. Those are kind of my 2 things because I'm old. And I don't know about you guys, but whatever it is for you, it's funny how when I sit down and actually, we measure the time, people are like, holy crap, I spend 40 hours a week on Instagram. And I'm like, wow, that's kind of a lot. That's like 3 or 4 hours a day, right? That's, wow. And then how much is your time worth? What's your average order? And, if you work with customers for 5 hours straight, how many orders are you going to close? And whether it's 5 appointments in a row or it's 5 demos at the booth in a row, how much are you going to sell in those 5 hours? And then when you do that income, it's like, holy crap, my hourly rate is like $100 to $200 dollars an hour. And it's like, great, well, if that's the thing standing in the way of you hitting your goals, you have to understand that you're not just getting a free social media experience there. You are paying $100 or $200 an hour to sit on social media for 3, 4, or 5 hours a day. And that's a big, big opportunity cost right there, right? So, the goal here with conquering complacency is not to remove your distractions, it is to regulate your distractions. Write that down, right? Don't remove them, just regulate them. So I control when I'm on YouTube. I control when I'm on Facebook. I only put a certain amount of time into it. So that way I'm not going down the holes, right? Of like, oh, that was interesting. Let me watch a little bit more. Oh, that's fascinating. Let me dig a little deeper into that. Sometimes I'll get down those holes if they're holes I really like. But I'm not gonna allow myself to fall into that trap, right? Because it just doesn't make sense. I can't afford to do that. My time is too valuable. How do you value your time? Second thing, let's talk about crafting consistency, right? This was the path for me to 200 grand. So once I got off the couch and stopped watching TV and instead started making phone calls. And don't get me wrong, I went from watching, 6 hours of ER, rerun marathons for days in a row and not making any calls to just making 20 phone calls a day. That was it. That was my minimum standard. Then it was 30, then it was 40, right? Once I conquered that complacency and started following through on what I said I was going to do, I was selling on a regular basis. I was always hitting bonus, never missing it, all that sort of stuff. And so then I had to learn how to actually craft consistency. So once we conquer complacency, it's just natural to want to find more productive things to do with our time. The secret to consistency is really defining your motivation so you're better, not perfect, but better at following through for yourself, right? The more consistent you are, the more motivated you become. Most people think like, oh, I'll get to work when I feel motivated. But what most people don't realize is that motivation is not something that you get. It is something that is generated, right? So every step closer to my goal motivates me to continue on that path to my goal. But if I never start taking steps and I never get out of the start, stop, right? Like, oh, I started towards my goal and I made some really good progress for SC2 Push, but then I didn't work for 6 weeks after that until I ran out of money and then I had to work. Anybody know what I'm talking about? Anybody been there? That was me at the beginning of my career for a long time, right? So, it's just making sure that I had a schedule that kept me fulfilled personally and professionally. So what do I mean by that? Like, the ability to create consistency for me was really about making sure that my personal schedule was set up in advance and that my business schedule was set up to complement that personal life that I wanted to live, right? And so it came down to making sure my travel was in my schedule, making sure that time off was not unplanned time off, it was planned time off, right? I work with a lot of people who are kind of like, well, but Josh, I really like the flexibility. I like, I want to have spontaneity. I want to be able to blow with the wind, do what I feel like doing when I feel like doing it. And I just feel like if I make a schedule, that's going to really limit me. And I'm like, that's fascinating because for me, I like those things too, right? I don't decide 8 months from now I'm taking this day off and here's exactly what I'm doing on that day off, right? Instead, what I do is I go 8 months from now, I'm going to take that week off or that month off. And I don't know what I'm going to do, but I'll figure it out. I'm looking forward to having that time off. And if I want it to be spontaneous and figure out what I want to do and go on an adventure, I'll figure that out. And that's going to be fun for me, right? It's planned spontaneity. And it's funny how the most freeing thing I ever experienced was when I set a schedule and I followed that schedule. I actually felt more freedom because I worried less. And when you're having that mental kind of game or conversation with yourself over and over again inside your head of man, I should be doing this, but I'm not. And then, oh, I want to work, but, but I really should be taking time off. I'm working, but I really should be taking time off. And then you're taking time off, you're like, oh, but I feel guilty, I really should be working, right? The reason we play that mental game with ourselves is oftentimes because we haven't mapped out our future far enough, or we're not consistently aligned with progressing towards our goals. As business owners, you just got to set the goal and go for it, right? So for me, travel, time off, family, being consistent with work and in multiple ways so I don't get bored in my business and I don't slide into just going through the motions. That's kind of the secret for me on what are the components that I put in my schedule that are essential. So if you want to be motivated, consistency comes down to understanding what your motivation is. So why are you doing this? These are questions you should spend some time with. You don't necessarily have to answer them right now, but make it part of your action step to actually sit down and explore these questions. Why are you doing this? Not just surface level, but deep. Are you playing for days right now, or are you playing for decades? So when you see everybody that was up here speaking yesterday, you guys can tell me, do you think they're playing for days, or do you think those people are all playing for decades? How about we answer that on 3? 1, 2, 3. Decades, exactly, right? So these are people who have thought about, where do I want to be 5 years from now? Where do I want to be 10 years from now? What kind of income do I want to have? What kind of savings do I want to have? What kind of investments do I want to have made? Right? And it's not all about the money. It's also about what kind of lifestyle do I want to live? What kind of freedom and flexibility do I want my family to have? Some people see themselves having children. Some people see themselves, being a father who's able to go to the game and be there for the kids and not have to work all day every day. So they're in the crank and bank mode right now. They're like, I want to work my butt off for the next 10 years so that 10 years from now when I have a kid who's in elementary school and middle school, I can be fully present. I know there's women in this room that I have had conversations with recently that are like, in a year or two, I want to be a mom. And I want to be able to take time off, and I want to be able to like be a mom and be the best mom that I could possibly be. But I need to crank the next couple years here to save the money to be in the position where I can actually make that choice, where I can work because I want to, not because I have to. That is a freeing choice. If you don't answer these questions, then you don't ever really get to the point where you can do those things. So what is the prize? What does the recognition stand for? I love wearing my Rolex because I know what that luxury watch stands for. It's not about the watch, it's about what it took to get that watch. It is a daily reminder of what it took to get there. So what does the income position you to be able to do? What is the impact you get to have on your community? What's the impact you have on every single customer? I'm motivated to work with thousands of customers a year because I know the impact that I'm having on their lives, on their families, right? I'm literally sitting at my desk. It's funny, Amy will have conversations with me. She's like, you just worked 14 hours today and you didn't set down the phone at all. I'm like, I know. And she's like, how are you not drained? I'm like, because I literally feel like I sat and just had conversations with friends where we caught up for, 5 minutes, 15 minutes, an hour sometimes, and they're paying me to do that. Like, I'm literally talking to them for 45 minutes, and 5 or 10 minutes of it was business and selling, and then the other 35 minutes we were just hanging out, catching up with each other. And she's like, I never thought of it that way. I'm like, yeah, that's what it is. Like, after 23 years of doing this, how can it not be that, right? So it's so much fun. I love it. So who are you becoming in the process? Look at that big old typo on there. Set the schedule that supports your personal and professional mission, then become great at following it. That's another critical key. Become great at following your schedule. Talk to any of the big people up here, they'll tell you that's what they're doing. So the path to 300K for me came from linking layers. So once you've conquered complacency, you've started crafting consistency, it's natural to want to find different ways to do business. At least for me, I found that if I only ever focused doing just one layer of the business, like just demos or just service calls or just events, just anything, right? It was easy for me to get bored. So I had commitment and I had a lot of time, so I started layering different programs and opportunities into my business. So I do a little bit of everything. I do appointments, I do events, I do marketing, I do business gift sales. I get referrals. I follow up with those referrals. I do virtuals. I've got mentoring that I do. There's so many different things that I've done to build layers into the business. I actually loved layering my business because it created a lot of variety, which kept things interesting and changing all the time, so I didn't get bored. But also, it created a lot of stability. If I had a bad day or a bad week in one of my layers, it was okay because I had plenty of other work to do in the other areas of my business, which would quite often make up for those bad days in the other layer that didn't go well that week, right? So where things really began to scale was when I decided I'm doing all of this work in each of these areas. Why not work to actually link them all together? So instead of speaking to a client exclusively in terms of the single layer that I'm seeing them in, I started thinking like, what if when I'm at events, I talk about like the appointments that I do, the marketing that they're going to get from me, the consulting work that I do with entrepreneurs. What if I talk about the other areas of my business, like business gifts and stuff like that? What if when I'm on appointments, I'm talking about events that I do, and I'm talking about the marketing, and I'm talking about business gifts, and I'm talking about all these different things that I do. And over time, what happened is my clients and I both started to develop a more global understanding of how things worked when you work with a concierge Cutco rep. Then, next thing you know, instead of having clients who thought that because they met me through an appointment, that was the main way to reach me or work with me, I had clients I met at appointments buying through my marketing, and people I met through my marketing buying at events, and people I met at events for personal in-home use buying from me for their business. All because I was consistently making sure that I was always sharing with people all the different layers of my business. Kind of like we talk about show every package to every client every time. This is like talk about every layer of your business with every client every time so they know all the different ways that you show up in the marketplace, so they know all the different ways they can choose to work with you. I was using my marketing to share about events. I was using phone conversations to share about business gift work that I do. I was using appointments to talk about marketing and make sure everything was crossing over. And so all types of people started showing up and engaging with all layers of my business. Heck, when my wife Amy's book came out, outside of her, I think I was her #1 book sales rep. So, I have a lot of customers that I've seen that are like, yeah, I bought your wife's book. It's amazing. I loved it. Thanks for having her sign it for me. I'm like, of course. I also sold it for double what she charged. So, I should have told her to pay me 50% commission, right? So I didn't. I wanted her to, benefit. But I have clients in my Cutco business who've hired me for coaching and consulting. I have people who bought $100 of product for their own home because that's all they needed, who have bought $10,000 from me for their business, right? So when you think about the layers of your business, what could you do to talk about all the things you do with your clients more consistently? As an example, do we have Connor in the room? He did a rap at the there you are, Connor, really quick. So every client of yours, Connor, should know about Scout Aid. Are you talking about it with every single customer? Or are you keeping it as a separate business and only talking about it in that business channel, right? So they should be crossing over. It's a great way to link the layers of what you do together. Okay, so let's talk about 400K. 400K, the path for 400K for me was scaling my skill sets. So guys, as entrepreneurs, when we do these things consistently, we're talking about so far, over the long haul, say for 3 years, 5 years, 10 or more years, eventually we get to a point where business is good. We're busy. We can fill our time. We have plenty of work to do anytime that we want to do it. How many of you would love to have a full schedule anytime you want to have a full schedule and not worry about how am I gonna fill my schedule? I don't have any referrals. Raise your hand if that'd be awesome for you. Right. By the way, this is what can happen. Everybody you saw on stage yesterday, they all have full schedules. They all can fill those schedules anytime that they want. In fact, the biggest challenge that they have is saying no to opportunities because they don't have enough time. So sometimes we get to the point where we have more work and demand put on us than we could ever handle ourselves. I'll share more about that in a little bit, but what happens is we get to a point where we want to grow, but there's just simply no more time in our schedule to work harder. This is where I learned the value of working hard and working smart. So I was at a point where I knew I wanted to get to the next level, but I just didn't want to put in more hours to do it. Because I could have, but it would have meant sacrificing valuable pieces of my lifestyle to do that. And so keep in mind, I was already working this as a full-time job. I've always worked Cutco as a full-time job. I think it's because I came up in a world where, I worked 40 to 50 hours a week at Taco Bell. I worked 50 to 60 hours a week at Applebee's, right? I worked at a canoe livery 50 hours a week when I was in high school. So where we rented canoes so people could canoe down the river, and then we would drive a van down and pick them up and bring them back. And, that was the business. And so I've just always had a strong work ethic. I've always had no problem with working hard. It's easier for me. It's always hard, but it's easier, I think, for me because it's a discipline and a characteristic I've built. If you haven't built that muscle yet, I challenge you to build that muscle. What if you committed yourself for 1 full year to 40 hours a week of work with Cutco? Some of you would be like, how would I do that? I don't even know how to fill 40 hours a week. Great, figure it out. Commit to it and then let the how figure itself out, right? Like Bert said yesterday, when we commit, the hard goes away. But if we're always 1 foot in, 1 foot out, it's hard to, we're not really committed. So then it's always hard, no matter what. So anyways, I'm working 68 hours a week, sometimes 100 hours during the weeks I was working. I work, State Fair, where 7 days in a row, we're at the booth for 14 hours a day. And that's not the only work I do that week. I choose to work those weeks. I love it. It's like the juice for my squeeze right now. It's amazing. But this is where I learned the lesson of scaling my skill sets. You see, if you're working hard already, the fastest way to grow your sales beyond incremental growth with price increases and just random things you might learn is to grow your skills. Track the numbers. What are the areas that you're putting effort in and getting average or below average results? You can probably think of a couple right now. Write those down. Well, if you want to live an above average life, we have to challenge ourselves and grow ourselves toward above average results. So personally, the first year I did 400K in sales, I didn't work a single day more than the year before. But I grew my sales by 30% over the year. the year before, the previous year, because I picked 2 skill sets that I was getting average results in, and I decided what results I wanted. I found the people getting those results already, and I studied those people. I got myself a mentor, right? I studied what those people were teaching, what they were doing best. I almost doubled my average order in those 2 areas of my business, and boom, I increased revenue that year by over 6 figures, just by focusing on those 2 skill sets. Now, imagine if you did this with just 1 key skill set each year. In the next 10 years, with 20% growth each year, if you're creating just 100K in sales right now, you'd be at almost 10x that in 10 years. If you scale those numbers out, right, you'd be at $1 million in sales in just 10 years just by focusing on 1 skill set that causes you to get 20% growth year over year. Sometimes we put so much pressure on ourselves to 10x now, when really what we need to do is slow it down, add a little bit of focus on the most important things, and give ourselves the gifts of commitment and long-term focus and time. It reminds me of a quote that I heard Tony Robbins share a while back that said, we tend to overestimate what we can accomplish in a year and underestimate what we can accomplish in 10 years. It's kind of human nature. So what is the skill set in your business right now where you're settling for average? Is it your calls to book ratio? Is it your closing ratio? Is it your average order? Is it selling ultimates, flatware, cookware? Is it handling objections at the booth, dropping down? Is it upserving? Could be all of those things, right? But pick the one that you think is going to move the needle the most for you, like you heard one of the panel participants answer in the Q&A yesterday. Maybe it's related to any of the different things. Maybe it's a product, package, or program you sell a little of, but you want to be selling a lot of, right? Maybe it's something totally different. Write it down and then get clear on what are the above average results you would be excited to be getting in that area. One year I decided during my state fair season, I'm going to implement the best flatware approach in the business, and I sold 30 flatware chests in 6 weeks, right? And that was a $45,000 increase in sales. Because the year before, I think I sold 2 flatware chests. What is the first step you need to take to get on the path towards scaling that skill set for yourself? Let's talk about 500K. So 500K was really all about systems. It's all about efficiency. So when we have all these things in place, consistency, layers, skill sets, we can only put ourselves on the path to buy back time, and systems are the key for that. When we're already busy at capacity, the only thing we can do is buy back our time, because we don't have any more time to give. So we have to buy back our time so that we can invest our time into the most important things. So how do we do that? Systems, when done right, can ensure one thing is done over and over and get a consistent result. Once systems are in place, other things can be taught, or other people can be taught how to replicate those systems for us and get the same results. Either we build our own systems, or we find others we can trust to provide and apply their own systems, their own proven systems to our business. So here's a list of my favorite systems that I've spent my career building into place. Some of these systems I outsource to trusted partners. Some of these systems are systems that I've built in my own business and pay somebody to do for me, but you need to have a planning system. What do you do to map out your sales, your sales goals, your income goals, your personal lifestyle goals? The admin system. What do you do to make sure everything is entered? Order notes, like orders, notes, follow-up tasks, customer service issues, data collection. How do you make sure that that's entered one time and it's done consistent? It's done right every single time. What's your marketing system? What do you do to either create your own or work with whoever you've hired to execute your marketing plan for you, to do things in advance, make decisions and edits in a timely manner, save and invest for the future marketing expenses that you know you're eventually going to have anyways? I know I'm asking a lot of questions, and you guys are probably like, oh my gosh, Josh, it's a lot. It is. But we're talking about selling $500,000 a year. We're talking about a $250,000 a year income. We're talking about an income that executives make, right? You got to earn it. It's not something that just falls in your lap. I got news for you guys. It's like the top 1% of the top 1% of the top 1% that are getting rich on social media and TikTok and all that stuff right now. Now, they may make it sound like everybody can do it, but I'll tell you what, they got lucky. That is it, plain and simple. You want to get rich, you got to work it. You got to earn it. You got to work hard. And trust me, I can tell you from experience that you can get rich. You can become wealthy selling knives. If you'd have told me when I was 20, when I started with Cutco, dude, in a few years, in 20-some years, you're going to be making $500,000 a year selling knives. I'd been like, my mom would shoot me if I told her that, right? Hey, Mom, you want to hear my career path? Guess what? You raised me great. I'm going to go make a ton of money and get rich selling knives, right? But here I am. Like, it worked. So what's your scheduling system, right? Like Chelsea Rodriguez said, if it's not in the calendar, it doesn't get done, right? So the more success you have, the more you sell, the busier your calendar will become. Your calendar system must reflect all these things getting done at the best times. What's your appreciation system? The appreciation system is what keeps your customers paying attention. I listen for what clients comment on the most. My clients comment on my emails, my texts, my gifts, my thank you cards, my customer service, my Band-Aids that I send out, my sales approach. Low-key and informative, that's my style. Rihanna can tell you, she saw me this weekend, right? I was low-key, I was informative. We had a great time. The more you listen, the more you'll learn about what works best in your business. But if you never do anything, or you only do something sporadically, or when you feel like doing it, you never really get traction or consistency, then you'll never hear consistent feedback, so how would you know? So sometimes we just got to take the leap. We just got to do the thing that other people have done before us because, we can trust the process. What's your stats system? We don't know what we don't know. I love this quote from Matthew Kelly. What we do not measure, we cannot change. What we do not measure, we cannot manage. How would you know what to change or adjust and what's working and what's not if you never measure your own results? I mean, you're basically ballparking, shooting in the dark, gambling at that point. You have to have a service system. Service builds loyalty. And the question you have to ask yourself is, have you mapped out your system for providing service at scale? And then learning. What do you do to learn consistently? How do you decide? Who do you listen to? How do you do it consistently? Creating a system is all about understanding the answers to each of these questions and then taking the time to map out your step-by-step processes for each of these things. And then, once you have systems in place, you can ask the question, how do you align support? Support. Guys, I have strategic partnerships. Is Jamie Batiste in the room? Where are you at, Jamie? There she is. Cool. So Jamie and I bumped into each other this morning in this room because we're both here early because we're working hard, wanting to learn and get better, right? And Jamie was like, oh my gosh, I am just so, my biggest takeaway is just how open everybody is. All the champions in any other corporate world job, they keep their secrets. They don't share. They don't want competition. But here in this world, in this Cutco world, the community is so supportive and everybody openly shares, here's what I'm doing to be successful. I want you to be successful too. Let me pour into you, right? I mean, Patrick's sitting in the room without his big hat on today. And Mike Dowd has poured into Patrick because Patrick said, please pour into me, right? Patrick made the investment of mentoring with Mike. So I have mentors, I have strategic partnerships, I pay people to do my marketing. I am Vast Action's #1 client, just so you guys know. I pay them more than anybody else because it works. Every $100,000 I invest in Vast Action pays me back more than $100,000 in profits, right? Just profits after expenses. So I have a financial partnerships, right? Where I pay people to be on my financial team to help me manage that. I have accountability partnerships. You have to get these things set up, guys, to put yourself in the position where you can take it to the next level. And the last thing I'll share with you, and this is how I'm going to wrap this up, is loving leverage. This is the 600K plus thing, right? This next lesson that I learned is the pinnacle. See, once we're minimizing complacency, when we're being consistent and maximizing that, when our business is layered, when we're consistently growing our skill sets, when we have great systems to support us, we should be selling so much and we should have so much demand for our time that we have to begin choosing between opportunities. And when this happens, it can feel like we're being pulled in so many different directions towards so many good, quality opportunities that align with our values. So what do? Well, what I'm about to share is the one thing everyone wants. Some of you are ready for it. Some of you are not. The biggest lesson I've learned is that this one cannot be shortcutted. It must be earned, and we only earn it once we've developed ourselves in the other areas that we've already talked about. So once we've maxed out our capacity, proven what we're really capable of, and we're creating the consistency, the financial stability, and the loyalty from our clients that it just makes sense to leverage. To get to my highest level of consistent performance and growth personally and professionally, I had to learn to love leverage. See, guys, I built my business for years. It took a lot of blood, a lot of sweat, a lot of tears to make it happen. It was my baby, really, right? And that said, it made it hard to let go of some things. I had my way that I entered things in my CRM. I had my way that I copied my notes over. I had my way that, whatever, like fill in the blank. I wanted to control it all. And there came a time where I had so many stacks of paperwork around my office, like so much that needed to be done, but just wasn't getting done because I was focused on income-generating activities that I just had to let go of some things just to keep up. I don't recommend waiting that long, by the way. So I waited literally years and years and years past the time where I was ready. What I recommend is that once you reach capacity in an area of your life or business, as quickly as possible, map out the step-by-step process to making that area work for your business, then design a system that makes sure it can work consistently over and over again, then find someone who is great at whatever skills it would take to follow the process and replicate the system, and then position yourself to do the first step. You do the first step. You don't just unload it completely and never pay attention to it again. You have oversight as the business owner. You do the first step and the step where you can bring the most value to the process every time. So for me, for example, the first step is I write the order and then I give it to my team and they process the notes, the tasks, and all that sort of stuff. And then I check in towards the end of the steps to make sure everything's going good every week, right? So I'm maintaining that oversight. I can add value to the process. I can make sure that I'm focused on what I'm best at. What's great about leverage, you can always buy back much of the time that you would normally spend on that process and system and instead reinvest that time back into the places where you can bring the highest value and make the money. So for me, that was buying back my admin Mondays by processing that out. I fell in love with it. I didn't take advantage of it. I'm still involved, and I still work hard, but now I'm surrounded by amazing people who are way better at so many things than I could ever be, and I'm able to spend more time with the things I'm best at. I still have to step in and fill in once in a while or help with some of the other stuff that other people handle for me, but I spend most of my time doing what I love to do, and that's leverage. Now we have employees, we outsource work to professionals, we have contractors that we work with, we have strategic partnerships with people like Luke Mills and our awesome mentoring program. There's just so many things, so many benefits that it brings. So here's the deal, guys, some action steps for you guys. Take a picture of this. To consistently grow year over year, to break through and scale a business in a way that's sustainable, exciting, inspiring, and motivating, to build something that you could see yourself doing as a career and for years to come, I encourage you, I invite you, I challenge you to conquer whatever your complacency is, to craft your consistency and learn how to work this like a job, to link your layers together so that your clients know exactly what you do, when you do it, where you're doing it, to scale your skill set so you're always growing and getting better and better and better in this business, to build systems and support so that you can then fall in love with leverage and have people support you. And on top of all that, give yourself epic permission to think and believe and act bigger than you ever have before. And you can make special things happen just like you've seen so many people do in this business already. Thank you for your time today. I hope you guys have an awesome, awesome trip home.